Hello everybody. This little series is going to be on creating and implementing a VPN in your home or small business. If you've tried to do a VPN before using different products, you probably found that it was either really confusing or really easy. This sort of falls in between. Sophos is an extremely powerful VPN which allows you to really control the access into your system. Unfortunately, there's a few steps in setting it up. They're simple in and of themselves, but they are, if you miss a step, nothing's going to work. So I'm going to try to demystify some of the setup configurations here, and we'll go through the whole thing from start to finish. It's basically three critical parts, and once you do them, you don't really have to redo them again. So I'm going to walk through the beginning. The very first thing I usually like to do is set up a user. So I'm going to go under Authentication, click under Users, and I'm going to click a user. So let's add one. And I'm just going to create it something, or name it something creative like Test. I'm going to put the person's name down. And of course you're going to tune this to your particular needs, and I'm going to put a password of something sophisticated like 1 2 3 4 5 6, as this is a lab environment and I'm not really concerned right now. So I've created the user. I want to make sure that it's actually set up as a clicked on user, not administrator. And then you'll see that you're going to basically leave the rest of it blank. There are some options here to configure the remote access policy, which is going to be done for you at a later time. So we're not going to do anything else here. Oh, I did forget email. So let's put an email down. Okay, there we have it. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save. It's telling me I have to select a group, so let's go do that. So I'm just going to pick the default open group, which is actually set up here in the next tab under groups. You can just use the default open groups for now, unless you've got groups defined already and you want to do something different, you can. I'm just going to leave the open group for now. I'm going to go ahead and hit save. And that's saved my user. Now, the one thing you want to note here is that this is the area where that you're going to end up having to create or put more entries in, because you're going to want or potentially want users that are going to, or multiple users that are going to use the VPN. So if you do, you can set them up here. If you're doing this for yourself, then it doesn't matter. You'll only have one user listed here. Alright, the next step we're going to do is actually set up the VPN profile. So we're going to do that by going under VPN. And this is another one that you're probably only going to create one of, no matter how many users you have, unless you have a particular need for creating multiples. For now, for this experiment, we're just going to do the one. So what we're interested here is in the SSL VPN remote access. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And obviously there are no users, so I'm going to go ahead and create one, create a profile. So let's do that. So this one here, I'm going to just create a name. So I'm just going to call it test profile. Okay. Optional description. And this is where you're actually going to add users to it. So if you look under identity, this is the part where I actually assign users to this profile. So I may have one or more users, and I'm just going to pick them from here. If you notice, here's automatically pops up to where I can assign the entire group, which I don't want to do, or a specific user. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the specific user. Now that user has been assigned to that particular profile. And again, I can have multiple users there. One that's really critical for me, and probably will for you as well, is I like to use this as a default gateway. And what that means is all the traffic is coming when a person hooks up to the VPN. All the traffic is tunneled through into your home router or your Sophos device, and then from there broadcast to the internet or to internal services. It's really a great idea when you're, especially if you're in places like trying to use public Wi-Fi or in a hotel or something like that. So I prefer, and of course, you don't really know who's monitoring what, depending on the places you visit and where you hook up. So by using a tunnel and using your particular router as a gateway, it's a little bit more secure. So I automatically create that. And the rest of this is pretty much going to stay default or blank. So that's all I really need to create my I take that back. One other place I'm going to go ahead and create is once I create the default gateway, I need to assign resources. So here you may have a bunch of IP addresses or devices listed. This is where you can control to the device itself what they have access to. So you can drop in an entire port, meaning they have access to the entire LAN, or if you've segmented your LAN, much like I did, then you can actually assign separate segments, or you can assign a specific computer. So you might limit it to 2 or 3, a NAS unit or something that a person would need to have access to. Of course, if it's yours, if you're doing your own personal login, then you might want to have control to everything. In which case, you can do a select all or whatever. Here, I created a dummy server earlier, and this is what if I wanted to limit the access to that, then I would hit that and assign that to that profile. And again, you can open this up as much as you want, or close it as much as you want. It all depends on what you're trying to accomplish. So for this experiment, I'm just going to leave server. From here, I'm just going to hit apply. It's going to give me a warning that previous configurations are going to be overwritten. Yes, that's kind of what I want, so I'm going to go ahead and say yes. So again, you can have multiple profiles here, depending on your needs. I typically only use one, but I'm usually the main user for my VPN. So that's basically all you need to set up the VPN profile. Now that's the next step. So I'll take you on to the third step, which is the firewall rule. Okay, before we go on to the firewall rule, there is one other thing I wanted to cover while you're in your VPN profile configuration. There's one area I'd like to just quickly mention. And actually it has to do with the overall global settings. So if you look up here in the upper right corner, you have an option to change global settings. You really probably won't need to do a whole lot here. Probably the only other things you're probably going to want to change is change it to UDP for better performance. And then if you have a desire to change IP addresses because of another configuration, you can do that here as well. I would suggest you leave it at the default for now until you've got additional adapters and DHCPs set up in your network. So I would just leave it alone. I just wanted to point it out that these settings are here because they kind of buried them over here on the corner. You don't see them unless you actually click that VPN settings. So again, it's not something that you need to do right now. You just need to be aware of it. The only thing I would do is change to UDP, and that's it. Leave it alone after that. Okay, so now let's get into the firewall rule. This is pretty straightforward if you've created firewall rules before, but let's go through it. So the first thing we need to do is is to create a firewall rule that will allow VPN traffic to come into the network, because as you've probably already figured out, Sophos is pretty tight and it just doesn't let things in unless, regardless of IPs or users or anything, unless it's been told to do so. So the first thing we're going to do here is create a firewall rule. We'll make it a user rule, and we're going to give it a name. We'll call it something creative like VPN access. Of course, it's going to be an accept policy. You can use a bottom description, and I'm going to put this one at the top. No particular reason. I just want it at the top. So here, what we're going to do here is the critical part. So under source zones is where we're going to actually select VPN. So we're going to basically create this rule that's dedicated to VPN. The rest of this is sort of optional, at least this next section here. So you can limit or control the source networks, but since we're coming in off the WAN, it's probably not going to be a big deal, so I'm just going to leave that at default. And then the destination zones, you'll have to create something here. I'm going to put mine at any, because I'm going to basically allow this profile to go wherever it wants. It is restricted by the settings that I did put into the profile itself, if you recall the earlier section. So I'm going to go ahead and hit any. I'm going to leave it to any services for now, and any destination networks. And again, I can control things from here with this rule. I don't need to double dip though. I've created the rule in the profile. I've created some restrictions for, device access in the profile. I don't need to replicate, but I can if I want to. And the critical part here is making sure that you click on match known users, and this is where I'm going to add the user I created. So if you look here, you see that I automatically see the listing of the test user that I created. So again, I'm going to go ahead and hit apply. So and then here, like any other firewall rule in Sophos, you can define the level of security that you want, whether you want to scan, intrusion protection, etc. I would recommend you at least set some default, at least scan HTTP, and use some level of protection for scanning. You can use the default LAN to WAN. You can use whatever you're comfortable with using, but I would set some form of filtering because regardless, you're still, if you're going to use it as a gateway, if you're going to use it as a tunnel, you don't want to turn it into the wild west. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to set some defaults here. That one. And I'll just leave the web policy off for now, because I don't know if I've actually created any here. So I haven't on the test environment. And then application control, again, I haven't really created any for the test environment, but if you did create some based on my other video, then you can assign them here. And again, I would recommend you do that. The other thing I would recommend, just for post-mortem, is go ahead and log your traffic. So we'll go ahead and hit save. So what I've done here is basically create a firewall rule that allows your incoming VPN to be routed and to be authorized to route into the places that the firewall lets me. So in this case, it's basically allowing me in, period, and allowing me access to just about everything that's defined in the profile. So I hope that makes sense. So those are the three critical parts. And again, just to kind of do a quick recap, the second two that we've done, which is your firewall and your profiles, you typically only do once. And then the users, you can create as many users as you want. So let's go on to the couple other steps that I want to just introduce you to, show you that they're there, and kind of explain how they work, and then ultimately we'll end up with actually logging in to the user profile, which is a little different than the admin profile, and then allowing you to get the client software. Okay, there's one more thing you're going to want to know about and possibly change, and I want to cover it real quick because it does impact how your VPN works. If you look under administration and you look under device access, you have kind of a matrix here that allows you to toggle different features on and off. There are two that we're going to talk about today because the rest aren't that important right now. But if you look down here under VPN, there really isn't anything checked off, which means that once I log in through the VPN, I'm not going to have access to these particular services. Again, most of which I don't really need, but there are two that you're going to want to make a choice on. The first thing you're going to want to make a choice on is your administration. So if you're going to allow access to the admin console, you need to make sure that you check this one. And again, that's totally up to you. And these are global settings, so whatever you do here affects everybody. So just bear that in mind when you're setting these. Since if you've got 25 users, you might want to be a little careful with that. In my case, since I'm the primary user of the VPN and I do a lot of remote control access, it's important for me to have that option on. So I go ahead and turn that on. The other one you're going to want to make a decision on is the user portal. Now, the user portal we're going to cover here right after this part. But the user portal allows the user to access the client software for the VPN, and it allows the user some other data that they may or may not want, or you may or may not want them to have. So for this experiment, I'm going to go ahead and check it on, and I'm just going to hit apply. And that's all you're going to do here. It's all you're really saying is the VPN zone, what am I allowing it control to? And again, most of this is the default is fine. You don't really need to have it access any of these unless you again have a specific need, and you can customize this to do what you want. But for our purposes, the critical decisions are: do you want to access the administrator console? And that's when you type the 172.16.16.16.444. That will not work through VPN unless you enable the administrative services there. So you just need to know what that is. And then again, on the user portal, which are accessed slightly differently, you need to decide whether that's going to work or not. So really, that's all we need here. And let's get into the user portal, because that is where it all kind of comes together. Okay, so the last step that we're going to cover today is the user portal, and this can be implemented in a bunch of different ways. I'm going to assume for argument's purposes that your laptops or users are set up on your local network before they are put out to the field. So that's where the user portal comes in. If you've checked off the user portal here that you want them to have access to the user portal, they'll be able to get to this screen. So if you look at this screen here and you type the same IP address, 172.16.16.16 without the 4444 on it, then when you access it, you'll get something that looks identical to the admin portal, except it says user instead of admin. And if you recall, earlier in the video, we set up a test user. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in and put the password in and log in. Now, from here, it's going to give me some information, and it's actually pretty useful. But the main thing I want to do here is access the SSL VPN client information. So I'm not going to get into how all these work. If you've used OpenVPN before, you're going to be real familiar with this, because it's kind of the same thing. It's just been kind of updated, enhanced, and changed by the Sophos folks to give it that personal touch. But a lot of the functionality is the same. Actually, if you're using iOS or Android, you're going to use the OpenVPN client to actually access your Sophos VPN. So just real quick, if you give you the differences here. This is doing this from, assumingly from the device that you're going to deploy that's going to use VPN. Although once you get into here and you download the software, they can be sent to people through a secure connection or through an online repository like OneDrive or something like that. But So for this particular user, what you're going to want to do is send it to that user or install it on the particular device. So if you log in and you download the client and configuration for Windows, that puts in the VPN client, and it puts in the configuration that Sophos needs to access your particular device. The difference between downloading the configuration and the configuration in client is that you only need the client once. So if you download the client and you install it, and you put the configuration on, and you're done pretty much. The only thing is, if there's significant configuration changes to your device, you can re-download just the configuration without changing the entire client software. So it's just a quick way, it's a quick install. It just updates the configuration, like a new IP address or something changed. And then you've got here the other critical one is the Android iOS profile, which again, those are loaded into OpenVPN. I'm not going to get into that just here. But that's it. I mean, I know it sounded like a lot of steps, but if you break those down, one by one, you'll find that it's actually pretty straightforward and offers you a tremendous amount of control. So just a quick recap to kind of go over the quick steps and why you want to do them. So again, you always start with the user. The user is the kind of the critical, it's kind of the epicenter where things start. You're going to create your different users. From the users, you're going to create your VPN profile. And again, the profile can be just a single item. Typically doesn't have to be changed unless you want to add services to it. If you recall, where you put permitted services on there, if you didn't leave the default as any and you controlled services there, you can change that, update that at any time. And then, of course, the firewall rule. And the firewall rule allows you to control and allows to the VPN connection to control to things on your network. So hope you found that helpful, and I will see you guys later.